everybody. Welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. This is episode 150 for April 14th, 2011. I'm Ryan Schrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm a very messy Josh Walrus.
And I'm Al Malventano.
And he's clean.
I'm not sure what the messy part is about. I apologize. I'm going to blame Jeremy for this. It was his job. I totally assigned it to him to find something amazing to do for our 150th episode. Instead, you get another hour-plus allotment of rambling tech geeks about hardware.
I aligned the Stanley Cup playoffs to start the same time that we start our podcast. What more do you want?
See, I would have thought you would have done the exact opposite if it had been in your, jurisdiction to decide that. But
well, no, I'm streaming it just to the left of you.
Nice. Okay, so we know not to count on Jeremy's attention.
Huh?
Yeah, twitter.com/PCPer, Facebook.com/PCPer. Go to those addresses, sign up, follow us, like us, all those et cetera things. But first we're going to jump into the week's worth of news and reviews. Not a whole lot of action going on this week. One bit of action that Josh was involved in was a review of the MSI 890FXA motherboard. Did we talk about this last week? I don't think we did because you didn't have the review up.
That's correct. I didn't quite have the review up. It came up about 2 hours after the podcast due to a myriad and sultry amount of bad things happening to me throughout the day. Sundry, not sultry.
Oh, okay.
And also, this podcast is brought to you by Lagunitas. This is the Wilco Tango Foxtrot, a multi-robust jobless recovery ale. We're not quite in the red or the black. Does that mean we're in the brown? I love the guys from Lagunitas, and it obviously loves me. But anyway, no, we did not have a chance to talk about that particular motherboard because I was, again, indisposed to get it up. But anyway, a little Viagra later, and a little bit of writing and some posting of pictures that Ryan really likes.
I do like
it's there. And so anyway, shall we go on with the review?
Yes, please tell us about said motherboard.
Are you positive? Because I could go on like this ad nauseum or ad infinitum.
It sounds to me like you're going to do it anyway, so let's just talk about the motherboard while we do that. So,
well, fine. I appreciate your faith in my ability to just talk about nothing. Anyway, the 890FX motherboard is pretty pervasive throughout the industry right now. We've seen many examples from guys like Asus, Gigabyte, and of course MSI. Their example was in particular the 890FX8-GD70. This was a high-end board. It had many high-end features. It had something like 5 16 by PEG slots. Had dual gig E Ethernet. Had an extra SATA 2 controller that had eSAT as well. It was just a very, very high-end board. DRMOS, super cooling, everything you could really want in something that costs over $170. Well, they've kind of thrown a rock through the glass ceiling and they've brought down an 890FX board to what I would consider a very, very easy-to-handle price range. This was originally released at, I believe, $159. It went down to $149 very, very quickly, and now you can get it for under $130. And if you act quickly, you can get a MSI rebate for another $15. And so you're looking at $115 for really what is, in reality, a very high-end board. Now, to get that $115 price point, they had to cut out a lot of features. So they don't have the touchpads that had, like, the power or the overclock dial or the reset or the OC Genie that, when you touch these, it would enable those that functionality.
It doesn't have OC Genie at all?
No, it's got OC Genie 2 in the BIOS, but it doesn't have an external button.
I see.
They got rid of one of the Ethernet ports. They got rid of the FireWire. And probably one of the bigger costs of it is they got rid of the really heavy duty heat piped heat sink that went from the MOSFETs down to the North Bridge down to the South Bridge, and that was a pretty hefty piece of metal that needed to be pretty exact in how it was built and how it was put together, and so all those things then are gone. But they've also added a couple other things which are really, really, really nice. The area that probably got the most attention was the power circuitry feeding the CPU. Now, the GD70, which is the higher-end board, it's a 179 board, it uses the DR-MOS type technology. Now, DR-MOS is simply the MOSFETs and the drivers are all integrated into one chip rather than being three separate chips like we see on most other applications like ASUS. They don't use DR-MOS, and DR-MOS is not a MSI only thing. I believe Texas Instruments, I can't remember exactly who, they were the ones who first brought out these chips and products, and basically what it is, it's a tightly integrated package that's very well matched, and it's all in one chip, and so it's a little bit more efficient than if you have, say, three different chips that are connected through a PCB. All of these chips are, I believe they're on a single die, or it's a multi-chip module. But anyway, they're very, very tightly interconnected. The electrical properties are very, very well known for this single chip. And so they produce less heat, and they're a little bit more efficient electrically. And so but unfortunately, they're more expensive to have this all-in-one package rather than three cheaper, two drivers and a FET, or one driver and two FETs, high and low. But anyway, they went from a 4+1 DR-MOS module in the GD70, and then in this GD65, which is the cheaper motherboard, they went with an 8+2 type circuitry. So they're spreading the load out through double the chips, and so you've got a decrease in heat, which overall, even though you're driving double the amount of chips, you're going to get an increase in efficiency due to just the design. Each of the individual chips are not heating up nearly as much, and they're providing a lot cleaner and less ripple-prone power to the CPU and the memory controller on these AMD chips. So that was the big upgrade. And I would consider that huge when you think that, hey, this high-end board that's a bunch more money, it's only got a 4+1, and you go down to a lesser product and it's an 8+2, and the technology behind it is really good. So other than that, I mean, they've cut down a lot of the superfluous stuff. I don't know how many people actually have FireWire controllers or anything that actually utilizes FireWire. I know I've been doing PC stuff for ages, and I've never had a FireWire-enabled product. But then again, I don't have any DV camcorders or anything like that would use it. I mean, Ryan, do you still use anything with FireWire?
Yeah, I do, but I'm kind of an outlier. I'm using FireWire for these cameras that we record the podcast on, but that's only because the software that I use on the Mac kind of requires it. Other than that, no. And in fact, even like digital film cameras and that kind of stuff not film cameras, but digital video cameras rather, that once were the staple of FireWire usage, have pretty much kind of abandoned that. You have to really, really look hard if you try to find a FireWire camera.
Yeah, I mean, and plus we've got USB 3.0 coming out. That's got a tremendous amount of bandwidth. I mean, it's I believe more bandwidth than even the FireWire 1394B, which, other than I believe one external chipset, it was never very well supported. And so a lot of the just the chuff has been blown off, and you don't have an eSATA port, you don't have a secondary J-micron controller or one of the new Marvell SATA 6G controllers on there. And so you just have the basics. It still has two PCI Express by 16 slots in there, so you could do Crossfire X. It's got like 4 PCI Express by 1 slots, and it's got one legacy PCI slot. And, throughout the year that I've tested these SB850 based chipsets, which is the Southbridge, we've seen a general increase in performance throughout the months and the years, and this is due to better BIOS implementations, better driver implementations from AMD, and with this board, I saw a pretty dramatic increase in burst reads and burst writes. Now, this may or may not be a big thing depending on how you do IOPS and all these other tests that I'm really not able to do due to the hardware that I've got here for testing, but it looks like AMD has really gotten on board and really gotten behind improving their Southbridge, and certainly the hardware is a lot better than what we've seen in the past. I mean, the SB600 was pretty horrific when it came to I/O and both USB and SATA performance. The SB750 improved that, but just not dramatically. And when you compared it to what Intel had to offer, I mean, Intel just overshadowed it so incredibly it wasn't even funny. With the SB850, we finally have an I/O controller from AMD that is at least competitive. I think that what we see with SATA 6 from Intel right now on their P67 chips, it's still probably a little bit better. But at least AMD's closing the gaps, and pretty soon here I'm going to try to send Alan an SB850 motherboard so he can really give it a once-over and see how well we're doing with a lot of this improved software and firmware. But when we start actually looking at performance, the performance is good for the board. It's a little bit slower in memory operations, but it's not significantly so as compared to, say, like the Asus Crosshair 4 Formula. Or even, I think I also tested against the MSI 890 GXM-G65. These damn numbers are just rattling through my head. But when you started looking at graphics performance and, overall CPU performance, and you look at this barrage and multitude of tests, the GD65 is right there. But when you start getting to the file system tests, it takes a step up above from any of these others. And again, this is a combination of an improved driver from AMD that was released, I believe, a couple of months ago, and this is a brand new firmware that they have that includes optimizations for the SB850 Southbridge. So, AMD's getting up there, and it's nice to see that they have at least competitive performance, and people aren't harping on them like they were over a year ago. Overclocking this board was very, very good. It reached something like 320 or 380, I can't remember exactly. 326 megahertz hypertransport bus speed, so that would allow anybody to, even if they had a multiplier locked CPU, I mean, it's going to take it well beyond the maximum of that CPU. When you have an unlocked processor, it reaches, the same point in terms of stability and performance as, many of these other higher priced products, and so, for $115, this is really a tremendous product. The only couple of issues that I had were mostly about the spacing and the layout of the board. The Northridge sat behind the first two PCI Express by one slots, and it was tall enough that it would have actually blocked the number one slot, and even though it had a cutout for the number two slot, some cards still wouldn't be able to fit in there. And then if you were running Crossfire, it would cover up the only PCI slot on the entire board if you had just a dual slot graphics card, which are now very common from $100 on up. I mean, you just don't see still slots anymore, except if you get like an HD 6400 board, and you're certainly not going to want to Crossfire those. And finally, the last was if you plugged in the first PEG slot with a long video card, which is just, again, any card that's $150 or more, it's going to cover up the SATA slots, the SATA ports, and so it makes it kind of a pain in the butt to get behind there and plug anything in if you want to plug anything in new. But overall, this is really a fantastic board, and you just cannot beat the price. $115 after rebate.
$115. Oh, okay.
$115, and the amount you get for that value, I mean, it's tremendous. And so we gave it the silver award. It didn't get the gold because, I thought some of the layout issues would, actually cause some users to take a look at it and say, hey, I want to use Crossfire, but, I've got this great PCI sound card, and I'm not going to be able to use it, and I refuse to use the onboard sound, even though it's pretty decent. And so that's a deal breaker for some folks, and they go on to whatever else that they can see that has something that'll work for them. But other than that, it's very few flaws with this board. It was very stable. I guess the first BIOS edition had some issues that in some configurations it would kind of refuse to boot if you had anything plugged into the USB. You wouldn't be able to install an OS. Unless, of course, you disabled the USB controller, then you could do it, and, I mean, that just led to all kinds of troubles.
Yeah,
MSI will fix that with a BIOS update. So, the first thing I do whenever I test a board is I make sure that I've got the latest BIOS, kind of read up on, what fixes it does and things that people have been running into, so I at least know about these issues before I go on. So, $115. It's going to be AM3 Plus compatible. It's going to be a BIOS update here pretty soon before Bulldozer chips start coming out, which a little bird I kind of saw, Gigabyte let slip that it's going to be June 7th that they may be launched on. We'll see. But again, this is, with the AM3 Plus compatibility, I mean, there's no real reason not to buy one of these boards. I think the manufacturers kind of saw the writing on the wall, said, hey, do we really want to sell 25% or 30% less boards in this time before we actually see a Bulldozer release, or are we going to jury-rig it so it'll have AM3 Plus support? And sure enough, this does, and apparently it works well, and AMD isn't really getting too upset about it. So it's probably going to work perfectly fine with a Bulldozer chip in the near future.
Cool. We did have a couple of other reviews on the website. Actually, the first was posted by Matthew Smith, who is our notebook reviewer. He looked at the Asus N53S laptop, which is an updated version. The N53 has been around for a couple of years. This is the Sandy Bridge iteration. It's a 15.6-inch notebook. It has a brushed aluminum finish that actually looks really, really nice. It uses, the exact specs are a Core i7-2630 at 2 gigahertz. It does have discrete graphics, the GeForce GTX 540M with 1 gig frame buffer there, 4 gigs of memory, 750 gig hard drive this particular model had. The 15-inch screen has a 1366 by 768 resolution. Some people might consider that a little low resolution for that size of screen, but considering the total cost of this laptop is about $1,100 at Newegg or Amazon, you actually get a whole lot of hardware for the price. Windows Home Premium, that kind of deal, 4,400 milliamp hour battery, got decent battery life, not great, but pretty good. Wireless, it's got USB 3.0 on it, which is nice. I know a lot of people kind of ask for laptops that have USB 3.0 support. And it does have some higher-end integrated speakers. It's not the best you can get on a mobile machine, but considering what a lot of laptops have, like my Lenovo with its one mono speaker, is definitely an improvement there. 6.5 pounds or so on the weight. Again, not a real road warrior machine, but as Matt talks about a lot in his reviews, actually, is that a lot of people buy laptops. Very few people travel with them in the way that we consider, business consumers and that kind of thing to do. But the design, the styling of this was pretty good. The only kind of major complaint he had was the keyboard flex, which is the amount that the keyboard kind of flexes under the pressing of a single key while you're typing. We actually have a YouTube video on there that demonstrates some of that issue there. Let's see. He talks about the display being really nice. Heat, not really an issue. A lot of connectivity, like I mentioned, USB 3.0. Good addition. HDMI, et cetera, et cetera. Decent battery life.
But it's crunchy on the outside and soft in the middle?
Yeah, exactly. You've got to keep things cohesive here. So performance good. Beats pretty much all the other notebooks we've tested. We did have an MSI GT680 notebook that was the very first Sandy Bridge notebook we had in-house that they asked for back because it was one of the recalled versions of the chipset. Performance, as you would expect with Sandy Bridge, though, is very, very good. The discrete graphics performs very well. It does use Optimus technology, so it turns off the discrete GPU when it's not in use, all that, et cetera, goodness that we all know about Optimus technology. It did get an Editor's Choice Award because of the combination of all these features and performance. And again, you can get it for $10.49 at Amazon.com, $11.99 in a couple of other places. Make sure you're checking out the very specific detailed specs on these boards because there are a lot of different models out there, so make sure you're picking out the one that you want. So I know a lot of people write in emails about laptops and that kind of stuff, so it's always good to keep an eye out for those. The other review that has gone up this week was actually posted by Steve. It's another MSI review. It's actually a GD65 motherboard as well, only this time it's the P67A GD65 board. Obviously, now that the B3 revisions are out, these types of motherboards and platform reviews are going to be a lot more common. A lot of the same pros and cons that Josh mentioned for the AMD-based solution. This also got a silver award. Decent overclocking. It does have the OC Genie, all those types of things, support for SLI and Crossfire. It's a pretty good board. USB 3, eSATA, FireWire. Again, it's a GD65 model of this, so you're going to see a lot of similarities there. So if you're looking for a new motherboard for an Intel platform, P67-based, Sandy Bridge processors, then go to the site, check out Steve's review there. Also a pretty good motherboard with a decent amount of overclocking features as well.
And the UEFI BIOS.
Yeah, he wasn't real impressed with that. He called it clunky. He said the user interface was kind of ugly. It moved kind of slow feeling. And he had seen the ASUS implementation of UEFI previously. He thought that was much better. Now, MSI is telling us that they realized that their implementation wasn't as good. It was better than some of the other manufacturers that don't even have them, like Gigabyte and ECS and those guys. But they have an updated revision of this software that's going to be coming out in BIOS updates in the not-too-distant future. I don't know if it's this month. I think he said it would be sometime in April, so keep an eye out for that. We'll obviously keep reviewing other boards. Yeah.
Just quick question about that. Do you know when they're going to start doing UEFI for AMD? So far, this has been pretty much all Intel boards.
I don't know. And he hasn't mentioned it. Nobody has mentioned it. ASUS, MSI, Gigabyte, ECS. None of these guys have really mentioned UEFI on AMD. Intel's been pushing it, so it kind of makes sense that it would start there. But I haven't heard anything about AMD.
Yeah, I think we may be a while off from AMD because the upcoming 900 series chipsets are all going to be, essentially based on these old, and a lot of these guys just don't want to spend the time and money to build a new code base for these products when they've got pretty decent ones
start
now.
From scratch.
Yeah, and so with the 890FXA GD65, it still supports greater than 2.2 terabyte drives, but you've got to put it in IDE mode and select Infinity HD or some other setting, and that'll allow you to not boot from a larger than 2.2 terabytes, but it'll allow you to recognize it. Mm-hmm. But you give up all the lovely features and AHCI and some of that performance. So
boot to that.
It's kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
I'd also like to know why they include games in that BIOS. You read through the review, and part of the UEFI BIOS is Puppy Run, Pair Match, and Breakout.
I'm excited to play Breakout. I want a motherboard with Breakout, damn it.
I'm working on the BIOS. I know it looks like I'm playing a game, but I'm working on the BIOS. I can understand Skype.
Maybe that's how you unlock things. You can unlock new overclocking features if you get to a certain level of whatever.
I think you just ran into the next $100,000 idea.
I'm selling it. Copyright it. We're doing that here.
You got to unlock the extreme BIOS by beating the boss.
Let's see. We've got some news items we're going to get to as well. First, we will take a quick break and thank today's podcast sponsor. Mm-hmm. All right, we are back. Again, like I said, not a whole lot of reviews, not a whole lot of news coming up. Let's talk about rumored 600 family GPUs coming from AMD in the not-too-distant future. Jeremy, you wrote up this news piece that's kind of coming from Digitimes.
Yeah.
Which, believe it or not, tends to have pretty good success on their rates of truth. So
yeah. Well, they mentioned one of the three coming out is the 6450, which we've already seen the reviews of, and unfortunately does not look so good against NVIDIA's GTX 430, or the fact that you can just jump up by in about essentially double the price, still about $100, and triple your performance. The nice thing is you're getting a 6670 and a 6570, which is going to be bridging the difference between the 6770 or the 6750 you can get now and this 6450 that we will be able to buy soon but have seen the reports for. So we haven't seen any idea sort of what the 6670 or the 6570 are going to perform like. But since AMD already has a card at about $110 and the 6450 is supposedly coming out at $55, we can sort of guess what the prices are going to be, which is interesting because, as I say, NVIDIA, you jump from the 430, which is about $60, to the 450, which is just over $100. All of a sudden, AMD has two chips in the middle of the price range. It's just going to see how well they perform.
And moving on from that, I believe that Digitimes article also commented about we should see mass production of the 7000 series, which is the 28-nanometer reboot of the AMD 6000 series. Apparently not a whole lot is going to be changed in terms of architecture. We may see more shader units and maybe some ROPs and other stuff like that, but it's going to be fairly similar to what we have with the 6900 series. But I'm calling a little BS on that because as far as I know, TSMC, who is the only person with anything remotely looking like a 28-nanometer process, is nowhere near ready for mass production of this particular node. I mean, Global
You don't think
Foundries...
Global Foundries is up there?
No, Global Foundries is even farther behind. I mean, we thought that... a couple of years back when the AMD split happened, we thought, Global Foundries has all this expertise, they've got all this extra capital, they're going to become able to come out with these, basic, more general process nodes a lot faster than the competition. They're going to end up dominating, and it's just not that simple. I mean, it's a lot of voodoo, and it's a lot of magic, and it's a lot of just pure luck getting your process nodes to where they need to be. And it's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of money. I mean, it doesn't matter how much, if you're used to the full nodes like AMD was doing, I mean, they did copper, they did SOI. I mean, they were really, really, really focused on the process nodes for CPUs. And suddenly they're opening up the company to all of these, bulk processes. It's a different technology. I mean,
sure.
It requires a lot of the same equipment, but the mindset, maybe, it's going to be different there, but just the basics of it are totally different. Because you're looking to have still a good performing product at a very, very cheap price that you can sell out to all these other, fabless semi guys, as compared to being AMD's only, way to actually fab their chips. That they're going for ultimate performance to keep up with Intel, and price, while still a very important factor, is something that's pushed at the back. I mean, we looked through how AMD has done it in the past. I mean, they're one of the first to implement copper. They used SOI. Nobody else does in the industry. I mean, right. They spent the money where they thought they needed to get their CPUs, and now they're going into this, we're going to be a foundry for all these other fabless guys. This should be simple because we dealt with all of these really, really complex technologies. And, when you first looked at their roadmap, when they first came out as a separate company, it was very, very aggressive. I mean, we thought we'd see 28-nanometer bulk stuff going out by December of 2010. Well, that's not the case. It's going to be probably mass production in Q4 of this year, so it's a year behind almost. And, TSMC is not doing much better. they may be ahead of global foundries, and they certainly are able to address customers' concerns a whole lot better than global foundries because this is old hat for TSMC. But boy, we're not going to see mass production of 28 nanometer until later in 2011.
What was the rumor you heard? When did you hear shipping on that?
It was just like in the last couple of days that I believe Tech Report talked about it, and it was in Digitimes, and they said that they were going to start mass production of the AMD 7000 series because we know that the 7000 series have taped out from AMD, at least probably the mid-range and the top-end part.
Yeah.
And but they said mass production would start soon, and I just don't see either Global Foundries or TSMC able to produce these kind of parts. Certainly they're going to get samples back in, maybe a month, 2 months, but I just don't see them ramping up production of 28 nanometer because the first thing that AMD would want to do was get the APU Fusion, the next version of Ontario Zacate. I can't remember what the code name, but I mean that's going to be their big moneymaker. And if they can get that on 28 nanometer, that opens up a whole new world of low power applications for these pretty competent processors. So AMD's wishing TSMC had 28 nanometer and where they need to be, but it's not. And as another segue. Apparently, they also taped out the latest generation of APU, and it will be a 28 nanometer part. But again, we're not going to see that for a while. So it certainly sounds like AMD is still trying to kick down those doors. I mean, they're still being competitive. They're scrapping.
Mm-hmm. I like it. I like for people to be over aggressive in that type of stuff than under.
Well, Josh's mention of Dirty Pool does remind me of one thing about these three cards coming out.
What's that?
With the 6670, 6570, and 6450, in case you haven't heard enough numbers yet today.
Yeah.
These are the OEM builder level cards.
Okay.
You're going to start seeing Dirty Pool where all of a sudden they're slapping on DDR3. And maybe the card looks like it's got a little more extra memory. Or maybe they're claiming it's a little bit faster. It's not going to be GDDR5. This is the price range. We've seen it before on many previous generations where all of a sudden you start not seeing necessarily NVIDIA's SE-type sub-models, but just suddenly a card appearing that's got twice the RAM, but it costs less. Wait a second here. What's going on? Take a look. It'll be DDR3.
Something to keep an eye out for. Also, something interesting we saw this week was Microsoft at a show probably none of us have ever heard of, had never heard of, was demonstrating and talking about Internet Explorer 10, which is interesting because Internet Explorer 9 just officially came out last month, I guess. It's been in beta forever. A big upgrade for Microsoft in the browser wars. So they were demoing IE10. They were kind of showing it. Here's our performance. Here's our standards acceptance compared to something like Chrome. But more interesting to us hardware guys than necessarily the software itself was the fact that they said this is running on the next generation of Windows. So it's not running on Windows 7. It's running on Windows 8 or whatever they're going to call it, which is kind of cool. It looks just like Windows 7, kind of like how Windows 7 looked just like Windows Vista when it first started coming out. But
no ribbons.
What's more interesting, however, was that it actually was running on an ARM system. All the demos they were doing, the demo they were doing of IE10 was running on an ARM-based processor. So not only was it Windows 8, but it was Windows 8 running on the ARM architecture, and it was running IE10 on that same ARM architecture. And NVIDIA, of course, since it was a Tegra-based SoC, put out a blog post, saying, "Hey, look at this. This was one of the first demonstrations of Windows 8 on ARM. Here it is. It's coming. It's running on Tegra. This is a giant revolution in computing." And we talked about this a lot at CES and shortly thereafter in January, where this Project Denver that NVIDIA is involved in, that they're developing these high-performance ARM processors for desktops, notebooks, maybe even servers, that type of thing, is really kind of a shift in the market. Now, seeing one demo and seeing Internet Explorer 10 doesn't really prove anything. There are, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of applications that would have to be rewritten. You can't just Windows running on ARM and expect it to work. Things have to change. The operating system, I don't think, can handle that on its own unless they come up with some amazing emulation style back end. Is that correct, Josh?
I wasn't paying attention because I was reading about somebody else. So say that again? No.
When Windows on ARM comes out, you're not going to be able to install x86 applications on it unless they come out with some type of emulation built in the OS.
Maybe. I saw a little bit about this. You might be able to because they are planning on doing some emulation, but emulating x86 on ARM is going to suck. It's just not going to work very well. You probably, even though you may have a 1 gigahertz processor, once you start throwing in emulation, you may be lucky to have performance of a Pentium 200 MMX type product. Now, if you do it the other way around and run emulation on a modern x86 processor that has 6 cores and 10 stinking threads or whatever you want, it's going to do perfectly fine in emulating ARM. But the other way around, not so much. But the other interesting thing is that the largest development tool that people buy for software development is, Microsoft Virtual, what is that called? Development tool. Come on.
Visual Studio.
Studio. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so they're going to put plugins on that, so guys can take the stuff that they developed using the Microsoft Virtual and quickly get that to ARM. So we're going to see a pretty quick and efficient change of these products that will run on ARM and will run on there efficiently. So I think the software is going to be good. I mean, this isn't like back 12 years ago when Itanium came out and you had all of these hoops and whatnot to try to jump through to get your stuff to run effectively on this Epoch architecture. It's just not going to be that bad. And so I think that Windows for ARM, it could be very, very popular if they get the apps out there really quickly. And just having a common platform, it's going to help them out.
Sure. All right. So let's see. Nope, there was one more piece of news that Jeremy pointed out to us right as we were getting started on the show. Jeremy, that was something to do with AMD chipsets, the first to get USB 3 certification. So I'm assuming this means USB 3 integrated into a chipset for the first time?
Yeah, into one of their APUs. A couple of weeks ago, the certain vociferous website that we like to mention every once in a while mentioned there was a rumor that the A75 and the A70M Fusion controller hubs from AMD were going to be approved by the equivalent of the IEEE, which is the USB IF.
Yeah.
Well, it happened. They're approved. So when we start seeing these new chipsets with a Fusion controller hub hooked onto their new APUs, we're going to see native USB 3.0 support, which they're talking about up to, what is it? For Hudson, 4 USB 3s, 10 USB 2s, and 2 USB 1.1s if you wanted to go completely insane. I'm pretty sure that would tie up quite a few PC Express lanes, but hey, if you're that mad, why not?
That's pretty good. I mean, keep in mind that no other chipset, including Intel's latest Sandy Bridge parts, support USB 3.0 natively. All the motherboards and platforms, including that notebook we talked about earlier in the show, that have that are using external chips, which adds cost to the platforms, complexity to the design, at least to some degree, and there's the chance that it's maybe not offering optimal performance. Now, the same is true these chipsets as well, as proved by AMD's, what was it, the SB750 or 700, Josh, where it had just really bad USB 2.0 performance. compared to the Intel chipsets and stuff like that out there. So it's just good to see adoption of it. Hopefully, this will push Intel into the same road quicker. We'll see more adoption of USB 3.0. We won't have to worry about crackling thunder or lightning bolts. Yeah, whatever that garbage that Apple invented, right? Apple invented
that copper stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, I like USB 3. We use it all the time. We're using it today, copying ISOs of things we were installing over. So it's just nice to see. Okay, let's jump into some voicemails and emails. We've got a couple of voicemails today. If you want to send us an email, it's podcast@pcper.com. If you want to send us a voicemail, toll free, U.S. and Canada, 1-888-38-PC-PER. We have two. The first one about SSDs and being overkill. So if we've got that ready, we'll go ahead and give that a listen.
Hi, PC Per Podcast. Mine's unpronounceable, and you already know how awesome you are, so I'm not going to pander. A couple of hardware questions. First one is recently got 240 gig SSDs Vertex 2 from Micro Center for an ridiculous price of $330. So I have a question, which is, I was thinking about putting those two in a RAID 0. Does that destroy the trim function, or does it not matter at that point? You're talking about that capacity. The other question is in regards to the Z68, I think, from Intel. If it's better just to take one of those drives or even both and add them to a huge hard drive and make it the single volume, virtual volume they're talking about. Anyways, thoughts now would be really great. Trying to figure out what the best options to do here, or if I'm wasting my time with two of these. Thanks a lot.
I missed the tail end of that one. Was he talking about adding the SSDs to the end of a virtual volume?
No, I think he was talking about, remember how Intel's coming out with the technology that allow you to combine an SSD and a hard drive into a single thing?
Right, well, okay. So there's a catch on that we don't know if they're going to restrict what type of SSDs you can use for that feature. Like if it's going to be required to be some sort of specific caching model of SSD for them, or if it's just going to be whatever you plug in. And we haven't heard exactly when that's coming out. So I wouldn't hold out for that specifically. So he actually bought those two at that crazy deal. I think we saw that deal, right? Didn't we? I thought we were passing that around.
For 10 minutes or something, right?
Yeah, so he's quick. He jumped on that, and good on him. There is no problem running SandForce drives in a RAID. As a matter of fact, my system has 4 100 gig SandForce Vertex 2 style drives in it, and they're in a RAID 5. No issue with the RAID whatsoever. The only time I have any kind of weird issues with RAID due to the lack of trim over time and seeing issues with write speed dipping and whatnot just because of drives getting fragmented a little bit is mainly with Intel, believe it or not. Even though they fixed the fragmentation over time issues where the drive was degrading, the way back when kind of stuff that we reported on initially, there's still some issues with Intel versus the SandForce controller. It's just a little bit better. It's actually, when it comes to a RAID and having a complete lack of trim, SandForce just ends up being a lot better, at least at the current time. We haven't done RAID testing with the new 320 series because we only have one of them so far, so we can't tell, if there's those kinds of overtime issues or how it handles, extended use in a RAID without trim at play. We're hoping that all that's going to be a moot point because I would really hope that the next version of the RST drivers from Intel are just going to incorporate some form of pass trim through the RAID feature. But we haven't heard anything either way on that either. It's just a hope. But yeah, definitely, if you have those two drives, throw them in a RAID. If they're 240 gig, if you're not planning on using all of that capacity, like in other words, the 580 or the 480 gig that you're going to get, I would RAID 1 them because you're still going to get double the read performance. Keep that in mind. If you're okay.
I think most people are hesitant to give up, even at that price, $1.80 per gigabyte worth of capacity.
Right. I'm with you. But if his goal was for the performance, more so than the capacity, because if he bought 2 of those thinking the first thing on his mind was to raid them, it's up to him. It's up to the user. If you look at how much stuff you really want to put on that C drive, if 240 is good enough for you, then that's a pretty big chunk when it comes to you know pretty much your OS, any app you might install, any game you might install, as long as you're still putting your bulk media, which you really should not put on an SSD. As long as that's all going on a spinning disk somewhere else, then you're probably going to have a hard time hitting 240 just with installed stuff. I'm pretty hard on mine. I got virtual machines on mine, taking up space, all kinds of stuff, and
not to mention your fabulous video collection, easily and fast accessible.
Those aren't on SSDs, silly. Anyhow,
that's on a RAM drive.
Yes, exactly. No, so I mean, my RAID comes in
lightning fast. You need that to catch me.
My RAID comes in at 300 gig, and I have yet to, hit that limit anywhere near it. As a matter of fact, so 240 is still pretty good.
I bet you're kind of a neat freak when it comes to data storage, though. Things in their proper places. I am sloppy with my computers. I download stuff. And maybe sometimes I'll move it to the right drive that I need to have it on, but more than often I go, I've got 20 gigs free on my SSD. I guess I got to go start looking for stuff to move, things like that. But I see the argument either way.
Just to address something in the chat, actually, JK Software is bringing up, he thought RAID 1 only reads from one drive, not under any kind of Intel implementation I've tested. It reads as if it was a RAID 0 every time I've tested it.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, it has 2 copies of the same data. It might as well use it.
Yeah, it just treats it as if it was a striped, just a RAID 0 stripe, except it only picks up half the data from the drives. The write speed, keep in mind, is going to be limited to, one drive. And in the case of mix and match drives, it's actually performance just completely tanks because it's like even worse than the slowest drive if they're not speed matched. So try to stay away from that. So if you got a matched pair, yeah, you'll get some pretty darn good performance, and that includes how the IOs per second scale as well. Even in like a RAID 1, it will you'll get essentially double the IOs per second that you would with just a single drive in a RAID 1.
Cool. Yeah. Well, speaking of passing trim over controllers, I convinced work to send me to a Dell presentation earlier this week where we were at Rogers Arena, the hockey rink in Vancouver, where I, was forced to watch the Canucks and the Blackhawks practice. But in that, one of the presentations was from Equalogic, which is a sand company that they just picked up not too long ago. And their representative, when I asked, she said, we've got new SSD models coming out. The controller is swappable. The hard drives are swappable. No more forklift upgrades. But I'd asked, how exactly do you plan on passing any sort of trim or garbage collection through these controllers? And she gave sort of the nod, wink, wink, ask me again in 3 months. So you kind of think there is something out there. It might be a proprietary solution, but hey.
What really kills me about the whole trim through the RAID thing is the driver knows what sectors it's writing to. The way the trim command works is it's the same exact thing. It's just a command. It's a special command with a starting sector number and how many sectors after that you want to trim. So it's not like a rocket science thing. So the controller knows that, okay, I just deleted something from here. It shouldn't be that hard to translate from the volume as it appears to the OS down to the individual drives just to basically go, okay, that works out to these sector numbers. All right, let's just trim that. So it's really just a matter of software. That just kills me that it hasn't happened yet from anywhere, from Intel or AMD or even RAID manufacturers, even like Arica, who's really usually ahead of the game on a lot of things. They're the guys that have command queuing passing through multiple layers of RAID without a problem, which is a really tough thing to do. But they haven't done trim. Got me.
Maybe they should go to waxing.
Neat.
Moving on.
Good Lord.
We have a second voicemail we're going to answer here that is asking about potential advantages of an upcoming Intel chipset.
Hey guys, this is Kyle in the Twin Cities. I'm looking to build a new Sandy Bridge system in the next 3 to 4 weeks, and I was wondering if you guys could explain what advantages I would see from the not yet released V68 chipset versus the P67 chipset. Would this mean better times for DVD and Blu-ray rips and encoding? I'm building the system more with audio and video encoding in mind and just a little bit of gaming. Thank you very much, and I love the show.
Okay, the Z68, I guess I have to say, we never really heard anything officially from Intel on this still. Pretty much all the details about it are out, though, if you read around. It's not a secret anymore. I don't think they're even attempting to pretend it's a secret anymore. Z68 chipset will combine the overclocking capabilities of the P67 that do not exist in the H67. So if you look at the H67, it's limited in terms of what voltages you can change, what frequencies you can change, what multipliers you can change. It's very limited on the H67 product. P67, it's open. The Z68 will combine those overclocking features with the display output capability of the H67 platform. So if you have a Sandy Bridge processor, all the Sandy Bridge CPUs have integrated graphics in them. However, you can only access them if you have an H67 motherboard that has the physical electrical pathways to outputs, DVI outputs, VGA outputs, HDMI outputs, etc. P67 motherboards do not have that. The chipset doesn't have it in there. So the Z68 will combine those two features. So you'll be able to use the integrated graphics of the Intel Sandy Bridge architecture, the processor graphics, as Intel likes to call it, with the overclocking and performance features of an enthusiast-class chipset that you get on the P67. Those are what you will get with Z68. Now, you might ask, well, if I'm overclocking, I'm going to use a discrete graphics card. What's the point? Why do I even want to bother with the Intel integrated graphics? Two reasons. One, I imagine it will be possible with this chipset to keep both graphics enabled. In fact, I'm sure it will be, so you can use multiple displays. You can have displays hooked up to your outputs on the Z68 motherboard, and then displays connected to your discrete graphics card. Also, we talked about the Lucid Virtue software. This is software GPU virtualization, where you'll be able to run your games through your discrete graphics card, and but still be able to run things like QuickSync enabled applications that allow for increased performance with transcoding applications, certain transcoding applications like CyberLink, Media Espresso, and some others, to use the fixed function hardware on the CPU for that capability. And also you'll be able to play DVDs and that kind of stuff through the integrated graphics as well, Blu-rays, where it's just a little bit more efficient, not using as much power, run a little bit cooler than if the discrete graphics was doing it. So that's why you'd want both. Now, depending on what applications you're using, like I have heard lots of rumors that Handbrake will have, if it doesn't already have, Intel QuickSync technology capability, that there are some, let's call it, political issues that are holding things back in that regard, not anything technical. If that happens, Handbrake is wildly popular with, the DVD ripping, Blu-ray ripping kind of create your own media storage crowd, and that could, I think, really push QuickSync and make it much more important that you get a motherboard that supports both. As it is now, the kind of applications that support it aren't what most of the people that are reading our website and listening to this podcast actually use. It's kind of like Media Espresso is more of a mom and pop, brother sister type of thing, not kind of the enthusiast type of thing. We like the more options configurable settings of something like Handbrake for the most part. So I would say I still don't know exactly when Z68 motherboards are going to be available. It's going to be fairly soon. I don't know if I can say within 30 days, but probably within 60 days. So depending on your purchasing window, I guess, make your decision that way. It's kind of those things. You're always going to be waiting. You're always going to be waiting. You're always going to be waiting. But if transcoding's even somewhat important to you and you want that capability, even potentially for the future, then it would probably be worth buying or waiting for a Z68 platform when they come out. So yeah, anybody else anything to add there, or move on to emails? All right, let's move on to emails. Josh, you want to take our first email from Alex?
Do I have to? I guess so. You're such a ball breaker.
I know,
Brian. Email from Alex about multiple graphics cards. I, meaning myself, a.k.a. me, am looking into upgrading my GPU from an, doesn't really matter what two cards I'm talking about. I'm going to put a new card in my system and plan on using the old card for additional outputs to an HDTV so I don't have to swap cables anymore. They're both the same chipset vendor, but several generations apart. As a general rule, will I run into issues? Driver conflicts come to mind. Okay, in case the cards and questions do matter, here are the specifics. I have a 9800 GTX Plus and plan on adding a GTX 460 768 megabyte and using the new card for gaming and the primary display.
Now I have to answer it instead of just talking funny.
I have to answer it? It really sucks. Driver conflicts are not going to be an issue. And since you're not going to be doing SLI, it also should not be an issue. It might be an issue if you enable that use secondary GPU as a physics processor. It may or may not. It probably will do fine. So as long as you're not trying to do some SLI, which obviously you can't do in drivers, you're going to be fine. As long as you use the primary card for gaming, it's going to be great. Multi-monitor, it's not really going to care. It's going to black out those other monitors, or the other monitors will just show your desktop background and what other icons or funny things or video streaming that you have in the background, because that's what Alan does. That's why he's so distracted during these podcasts. He likes candid photography.
That's one of the things that always kind of annoy me about the multi-monitor is sometimes a game will black out that second screen, and sometimes it will leave the desktop up, and sometimes it adjusts the resolution of that other side, so whatever, like maybe chat windows you had up or something that you're monitoring doesn't really work. But
and so certainly you may have a few things you're going to have to work around, but as long as you're not trying to get them to work together in like a Hydra situation where you've got like a DX10 card trying to work with a DX11 and you're trying to force a DirectX 11 application, it's just not going to work well. I mean, Hydra's tried that. It doesn't work. You're just, banging your head against the wall. But the way you're going to do it, it's going to be perfectly fine. You're going to be able to use those extra outputs, just as long as you don't expect to have, an Infinity type thing or GPU surround or 3D surround, whatever NVIDIA calls it these days. It's going to work perfectly fine.
Cool. We have an email from Ro about Llano. Just wanted to ask you how good the upcoming Llano processors are going to be. A lot of my friends are going to hit the upgrade cycle right at the start of the new academic year, and I would like to know if they should hold out and wait for the new laptops. All of us are looking at mainstream solutions only. This is obviously all guessing since these parts aren't available. I haven't spent much time on Llano-based platforms.
3 times the performance of Sandy Bridge top-end chip for graphics, that is.
For graphics, right. That's the thing.
For
it says,
graphics.
how good are they? And it doesn't really say for like what purpose. If you're talking about word processing or even general CPU performance, I think Sandy Bridge processors are still going to be faster, right? Because Llano is Phenom cores plugged in with high-end or mid-range discrete graphics on a single chip, right? So
correct.
The combined performance is going to be pretty impressive from a low-end to mainstream gaming perspective, from a GPU perspective, from whatever AMD has been able to really whatever software they've been able to really enable with GPU computing. That's what they're pushing for. That's why they have these programs and are investing a lot of money, for AMD at least, to get software developers to write interesting, useful applications that use the GPU for more than just games, because you can only sell games for so long. You have to be able to tell us why the slower processing cores plus faster GPU of the AMD Llano is going to be, how it's going to be better than Intel's faster CPU cores but slower graphics. And at this point, they haven't done that yet. So they have a pretty big task ahead of them. The start of the academic year, I'm assuming that's August. Is that? That's,
yes, the back to school season.
By August, you will know all. You will have all the answers. If they're not trying to buy something now and they're willing to wait till August anyway, it's always better to wait till August. I would say you'll probably know everything you'll need to know by June. Computex will be out, or Computex will be the first week of June. That's the largest kind of computer show in the world, I guess. Probably, I don't really know. But new designs, new laptops will be announced there. Everything will be out and will be discussed by that time. So I think you'll have more than enough time to make that decision.
An informed decision?
At least partially. I don't know. You're listening to us, so you get at least something out of it. I don't know how reliable we are, but
we're just dirt.
Jeremy, you want to take the next email?
2-0.
Tuna? What?
Well,
talking about a tuna thing.
I didn't ask the school.
2-0.
Right.
We've got an email from Jimmy about an HD 4870X2. I recently scored a used 4870X2 on Craigslist for $50.
$50?
Apologies to anyone who bought one when they were recent. $50.
What you get for $50?
$50.
You get everything.
A space heater.
Yes. Soon after, realized the massive power use of this 2 GPU beast of a card. It's a space heater with pretty graphics. He's got 2 questions about the purchase. $50, folks. Should I even keep the card? $50. Most people warn of the heat, noise, and overkill factor.
$50,
reason enough
$50.
to stick with a simple 5770 or an equivalent 60,000 AMD card, which is not $50.
No,
since I'm only rocking 1080p.
$50.
Do I keep the card? $50. Keep the card. Good God.
Yes.
And what is a rock-solid PCU that won't quit on a huge card like this, but also won't break the bank? Because, well, the equivalent 6790, it just, it doesn't use any power at all. $50.
That's a hell of a deal.
You could sell
for
it
1,600 stream units and some 64 ROPs. I mean, that's still a monster card.
Oh, yeah. No, that one's not going away. And you can crossfire it with things.
For $50.
For $50.
$50.
For the PSU, well, I can't give you one for $50. I'm sorry. If you want to be solid, something like the Corsair TX 950, which will
well, even a 750 will do that. I was running.
See, that's what I'm wondering.
Cross-fired 4870s, which are full speed, full cards, full complement of memory, and they were pulling maybe 500 watts at max from the wall. So even their 750 watt power supplies, which you can get for under $100, they're going to do perfectly fine for that, and they'll last you a long
Ryan's
time.
Review, he's had 460 watts power consumption under load.
I did. Me?
Yes.
Okay. So then you should have at least a 600 watt.
There, Jeremy.
You should have a 600 watt power supply or something at the most.
So Corsair CMPSU 750, it's $99 after you do the mail-in rebate. 650, borderline. I don't know. You think? It's $10 cheaper. Save $10 on a maybe power supply. You spend the extra $10 and you're good.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Happy for $150. $150.
Unless you want to sell it to us for $50.
Yeah, Jeremy will cut you.
What does Jeremy get for $50?
He'll buy it for $30. You're only out 20. You're good.
Well, it's going to cost Canadian.
We've got one more email coming for Alan from Novell. Somebody.
Novell? Okay. Email about SSD capacity. Hey, crew, I have some reservations when it comes to getting an SSD exclusively for your OS. If I did do that and then installed all my programs on a larger capacity spinning disk drive, wouldn't the programs take just as long to load as if I had no SSD? This would also go for games that are installed on a separate drive, right? I would also have to direct all my applications' temp directories to the spinning disk, since it would fill the SSD rather quickly. I can't put myself to spend the money on a large capacity SSD yet, and would have to go for something under 80 gig. Please clear this up for me. Thanks. Under 80 gig. All right, so to answer some of the questions as he goes through there, a game on an SSD, or a game on a system where the OS is on the SSD and the game is elsewhere, like on a spinning disk, most of what that game does is going to be hard drive speed, except for any kind of, libraries, caching. Anything that happens to, caching, which if he goes too small, he might have to swap on the spinning disk. That's another catch. That's something else to consider. Because if you're going for that much of a budget thing where you're worried about the size of the SSD you're getting, you probably don't have enough RAM to cache the better games where you're actually going to swap. So you sort of get caught in like a catch-22 there, because then you need to make some extra space. You got to do other crazy stuff like turn off your file for hibernation, like disable hibernation, so that's not sucking up a few gigabytes there off the drive. If you're sort of okay with the caching as long as you're able to have enough room on the SSD for the caching. If you have more than, honestly, you have something like 12 gig or more, maybe even 8 depending on what you do, and you're running SSDs, I tend to just turn off the swap as long as you're not hitting that brick wall of just running out of memory and stuff starting to crash. Just turn it off completely, because you're adding work to the drive that you don't really need to, especially if your swap is on the SSD. So enough on that tangent. Basically anything that's not on that SSD is going to run slower. It may not necessarily run as slow as if everything was on the drive, because realize you are subdividing the tasks. So even if you had 2 hard drives, for example, if you put stuff on a separate hard drive and you're running a game, anything else your OS is doing, if that's coming off of hard drive number 1, right, everything overall is going to run quicker, because that you don't have one drive trying to thrash back and forth to do everything at once. So in some ways faster, in some ways slower. The majority of the game load stuff is going to be more towards the hard drive speed if it's sitting on the hard drive, though. And again, all depends on the game. Some games pack all of their data into individual large compressed files that don't really fragment that much, to the point where a regular spinning disk is still going to load it pretty quick. So again, it just totally depends on the game and the setup. Really, I would just, assuming that he has not seen what the difference is in performance of an SSD over a hard drive, that's something you just want to witness yourself before you consider how much money you're throwing at the SSD versus how much money you're throwing at something else even. So if you're thinking about upgrading something else, some other part of the system, once you saw what that difference was and how that applied to what your usage was, you might just decide to throw that extra $50 at the SSD to get enough capacity to put everything on it, and to put yourself over that ledge where you don't have to worry about subdividing all of your stuff anymore. And Windows 7 does make a lot of that easy, as far as even if you have a smallish drive, say if you just got the 80 gig model, 80 80 gig is still kind of tight depending on how many things you're trying to install. But it's really easy under Windows 7, for example, to take all those libraries, like the downloads, like you can just redirect the downloads folder elsewhere, and then every app that's doing the default downloads folder thing, it'll just download all your stuff to the spinning disk, so you're not just accumulating all that data. You could do simple stuff like set up a little batch file to blow away the temp directory every time you boot up, or just blow away all the contents there, so that way you don't have to worry so much about games, just because they tend to throw some extra stuff in there and they'll just leave it, right? I haven't seen a lot of games just cache elsewhere to the point where it fills up an SSD, like to the point of concern. I mean, there's other things you can look at. There's a few apps out there. What's the name of that app that shows you like a visual representation of all the capacity of stuff taken up, like on a drive?
I don't remember. It was one of our picks from a long time ago. It's a really great app.
I use. What's funny is I use one from like way back that's even like discontinued now. It's called Disk Mapper. They've been using that since like Windows 95 days. No, it was Winderstat. There we go.
That's such an easy name to remember. I can't believe we forgot that.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why. But that actually helps out a lot for something like a smallish SSD with your OS and trying to cram everything else on there. It'll make it pretty blatant. You know, you fire it up and it scans the drive, and you'll just see this huge block of something sitting on there and go, oh, look, I need to move that somewhere else so I have room.
Yep.
Yeah, but I mean, if you can swing the 80, go for the 80. Just keep looking for deals. There's all kinds of new generation drives coming out. That once they start hitting volume shipment, you're going to have a lot of the retailers or e-tailers are going to start dropping prices on the older or smaller stuff.
Yeah.
So just ride that wave. Keep an eye out. Give it a couple of months even. It'll be worth the wait. Trust me. And you'll get you'll be able to put more of your stuff on there and not have to worry about juggling everything.
Alrighty, let's see. Hardware, software picks of the week. We'll go through these a little bit quickly because I believe our beloved engineer is very tired, and I don't blame him. My pick is actually a combined piece of software for your computer and your phone. I don't have my phone with me, but it's somewhere around. It's called Unified Remote for Android. It is awesome. What you do is you install a server, a piece of software on your computer, your laptop, or more specifically, probably it's more useful for your home theater PC, and then you install the application on your Android phone, and I think they might have an iPhone app for it too. And you basically use the Wi-Fi network, and you can actually even do it over 3G if you have a static IP or a dynamic DNS name server type thing. So what you get to do then is connect to that computer, and there's all kinds of remote controls that you can use for it. There's the most frequently used one I had. This came up, I was trying to watch the Masters over the weekend, the golf tournament. Coverage on TV didn't start till 3:30. Coverage online started at 10:30 in the morning. So I was like, okay, I was sitting in front of my 50-inch TV, watching it on my 12-inch laptop. And I was like, this is stupid. Got an HDMI cord, hooked it up. And then I was like, now every time I wanted to change the grouping or something like that, I'd get up. So I was trying to find remotes for it. With this piece of software, you just use the touchscreen of your Droid phone or iPhone, I think, and it works just like a touchpad on your laptop. You move your thumb, scroll it around, 2 fingers to scroll down a web page, tap, double tap, all that kind of stuff. Plus, it has all kinds of other integrated remotes, like it has remotes for Windows or Media Center Edition with keys already out there, a Chrome selection. So if you're using Chrome browser, it's got easy buttons for homepage, reload, back, forward, all that kind of stuff. It's really, really cool. It is completely free. Obviously, they take donations, but it's completely free, and it works really, really well. It's also useful for here. One of the things we thought about is we've got like 3 or 4 different computers running. We don't have to have keyboards and mice connected to all of them. So this way we can, as long as they're connected to the network, jump on the phone. You can select from any number of computers. I have a list of computers that you can control. Touch one. Now you can control it, do anything you want to do with it. Boom, you're done. It's really, really handy, and I've only really been playing with it for 4 or 5 days. So if any of that sounds nice, check it out. It's called Unified Remote. You can go to their website, unifiedremote.com, or go to look for it in the Android market as well. Jeremy, what do you got?
Go Habs. And here I thought you were watching golf in 3D.
I did. It was awful. So. Yeah.
Oh, about what I expected. For my pick, I'm going with the new work units that Folding at Home is putting out, specifically the Core 16 Project 11293. It's been specifically designed to work with OpenCL, because the problem is that for the longest time, you could do Folding at Home on an AMD card, but they actually really were optimized for CUDA. It made sense at the time because NVIDIA's CUDA was a little bit more developed and it was a little bit easier to get a hold of. OpenGL.
Well, actually, it's kind of
well, originally
Home was using close to the metal for AMD.
Yeah.
And whenever they had a next jump generation product, the CTM stuff was optimized for the previous. So even if if you had a 4870 running with the 800 cores in there, and stream units rather than cores, if you put in a HD 5870, it's got 1600. It would only use half because that CTM was just so tightly knitted with the previous generations. But anyway, go right ahead.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, if you go back into the history, originally Folding at Home was only running on AMD GPUs. That was the original way that they did it. Once they started upgrading to the newer engines, that was all of a sudden where, like you say, all of a sudden, half of your card is being used at best. And at worst, it's crashing all the time. But this is nice. You do have to grab the beta version 7 client, which is freely available and adds in a lot of the things that people very devoted to Folding at Home have developed over the years so that they can manage clients remotely, so that they can monitor things, so they can specifically pick work units in some cases. All the scripting is included. So really, if you got an AMD card and it's sitting there doing nothing, you should look at Folding at Home, and you should definitely look at Team 734, which is the PC's Perspective Folding Frogs. They're a happy crowd. They'll be glad to see you, and it's a lot of fun. And if you don't know what Folding at Home is, it's replicating supercomputers on a distributed network where you're folding proteins. You're looking for cures for Alzheimer's, cancer, all the various other things that are caused by, the replication process in a human body going a little awry. Leave your computer on when you're not doing anything. Try folding, try SETI, try something. Just do it for PC Perspective.
It's really funny, a couple of years back when the GTX 280 first came out, and it was still NDA. And my part was I need to see how well this GPU stuff does. And I plugged that card in, and I downloaded the beta client, and I started doing work units, and I aimed it at PC Perspective. And pretty soon the Folding Frogs were like, "Hey, welcome, Josh Walrath. Wow, you must have a small folding farm in your house." And of course I said, "No, this is a single video card." And there was much, rejoicing and aghastness and all those other fun things. So yeah, it's nice to see these kind of big jumps from generation to generation that we don't see on the CPU side with folding. But anyway,
Dave Pender of ND715 of longtime fame from PC Perspective for folding or for SETI at Home got his hands on a Sun render farm for a little bit.
Oh, good Lord.
Oh, good Lord, that spewed things out, and this is 6-7 years ago.
Funny.
Oh, yeah.
Josh, you got a pick for us?
I do have a pick. Everybody hates TN panels. TN panels suck. You move a couple inches from one side to the other, and your panel changes colors. No. Well, Asus is breaking the mold here. They've got a MVA panel, which is kind of a cousin, brother / sister hermaphrodite to PVA, which we've seen for quite a long time, pattern vertical alignment for LCDs, and you can get this for $250. It's 24-inch. 1920 by 1200. This is a great deal for a pretty good monitor. It may not be as good as, say, a modern SPVA or a SIPS, but it's a damn shade better than the TN monitors that we have been seeing for so long. So $250, you need a 24-inch monitor that's of good quality. This really looks like a fantastic bargain.
All right. Not last on the list, what is your pick, Alan? I hope it's fun, creative, and exciting.
No, not really. Actually, it's an anti-pick. My pick is to not do something this time.
I would like to, I think, go back and look at the last selections, maybe over the last 2 months of Alan's picks.
Well, I gotta keep it,
I believe you picked the city once.
Yeah, I picked the city.
Which is neither hardware nor software.
Uh-huh.
I believe... let's see. You did pick a Drobo, so I guess that technically counts once.
Yeah, see? Don't be
and a C64. Okay. So maybe it's not as bad as I thought.
All right. So this is more of a public service announcement than a pick, though.
I gotcha.
If you go on, if you happen to be an iPhone user, I'm not sure if this applies to iPad or not, but iPhone 3GS or 4, there was a whole slew of battery drain issues with 4.3 when it came out, iOS update, and they supposedly fixed them all with 4.3.1. Well, no. Not necessarily. There's like a thread starting on 4.3.1 now that's like all kinds of people seeing sporadic. It's not as bad as it was with 4.3, but I had my phone charged when we started recording, and it dropped by 8%, and it was sitting on the desk off. Well, not off, but in standby the whole time, not doing a thing, with full signal. So, yeah, and that's 4.3.1.
Except for the streaming porn part.
No, I wasn't doing anything.
No. Boring.
Yeah, so just if you're sitting at 4.2 something and you don't necessarily need FaceTime to work on your phone...
and if you don't want that feature that Apple advertised very heavily to function.
What's funny is the only reason that I jumped on it was to help Steve out, because Steve was doing his review of the MacBook when it came out, and he was like, "Hey, it's got FaceTime." And I was like, "Oh, really?" So I updated the phone real quick so we could get him the stuff for his article. But yeah, it's not so much. And of course, Apple is a little bit, I don't know, controlling about like trying to roll back to 4.2 something, because their servers I don't think they're certifying the 4.2.x updates anymore. And since it has to like okay it through Apple, through like the mighty jobs or whatever, every time you go to like update something, I think he gets like a text message and he has to respond, like if you're allowed to update. So anyhow, yeah. So just keep an eye out for that, and don't necessarily jump on the bandwagon unless you want to risk your battery going dead, say, before your alarm goes off in the morning.
This is how you buy battery accessories. That's how they force that. So if you want to interact with us, sorry to break it down like that, but podcast at pcper.com is the email address. 1-888-38-PC-PER, toll-free, U.S. and Canada. Leave us voicemails. If you want to share this show with others, pcper.com/podcast. Follow me on Twitter. I am at Ryan Shrout, very creatively named. The site is at PCPER, PCPER. We get all the news or articles as they are posted. So with that, we will close out the show. We will see you next week for another rousing edition of the PC Perspective Podcast. I'm Ryan Shrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm still unfortunately sober, Josh Walrath.
And I'm Al Alventano.
Thanks for listening.